It is now my honor to introduce our guest speaker today. This is a man who is a veteran journalist and a magazine editor who has won more than 40 newspaper and magazine writing awards. He is a former senior editor of the Los Angeles Times Magazine and currently is editor-in-chief of the Orange Coast Magazine in Newport Beach. He is also co-author with Patrick Kiger, titled Oops, 20 Life Lessons from the Fiascos That Shaped America, which Publishers Weekly called as informative as it is entertaining. And he also wrote Poplorica, a popular history of the fads, mavericks, inventions, and lore that shaped modern America. Now in paperback, about which Publishers Weekly concluded, all history should be this much fun. Born in Birmingham, Alabama, and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, our speaker began writing professionally while a student at Penn State University in the late 1970s. His 15-year career as a newspaper reporter took him around the world, from the rural poverty of southwestern Pennsylvania to Nevada's Mustang Ranch bordello, from the riot-torn streets of Los Angeles to the revolutionary streets of Manila, from pre-glass-nosed Siberia to the new frontier of cyberspace. He is the author of 3 crime novels, Time Release, Shadow Image, and the Edgar Award-nominated Straw Men. He also has a special connection to our very own Marjorie Lucebrink, whom you'll see a little bit later, having taken a class from her. A graduate from the Pennsylvania State University with the degree Bachelor of Arts in Journalism, please join me in welcoming today Martin J. Smith.
I'm going to start with a confession. I'm here to urge you all to aim high in life, and I'm here basically to not screw up. That's my goal today. Thank you all for the honor of speaking here today. It's a privilege for me, especially since a teacher from Irvine Valley, Margie Lucebrink, played such a pivotal role in my life and my career. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But I decided to talk today about how to become the person you want to be when you were 17. Because the one message I want to get across today is that you don't have to settle for less than what you've always wanted to be. But first I want to tell you about last weekend. I've been writing this speech for months, polishing it, getting it just right. But then I attended my own daughter's graduation at the University of Arizona in Tucson, and I mentioned to her boyfriend, Will, that I was working on a commencement speech about becoming the person you wanted to be when you were 17. And he said, "You mean the one like Steve Jobs gave at Stanford?" Nice kid, Will. And I say as casually as possible, "So, well, when was that exactly?" And Will says, "That was in 2005. My economics professor made us watch it in class. He said, 'Great speech. You can watch it on YouTube.'" So my first thought was, well, crap. But as I've often been required to do in my life, I took a deep breath and I adjusted my attitude. I thought, Steve Jobs, that hack, what's he ever done? And it turns out Will was wrong. It is a great speech, but it's very different than what I want to talk about today. Besides, this is my chance to tell you what I've learned in life. If you want Steve Jobs, go to YouTube. Today, you're stuck with me. And since, bad news, by the way, tomorrow at 6 p.m., the world's going to end. So I'm honored to be giving you the last piece of advice you maybe ever get. Some of you aren't much older than 17 right now. Some of you obviously are younger than 17. And many of you are getting serious about chasing your dreams. And to that I can only say, go. Let nothing stop you. Be exactly who you imagine yourselves to be. But I'm also going to make a prediction. Maybe 2, 5, 10 years down the road. Some of you may find yourself stuck in a career or a life that no longer thrills you. You'll be staring off into space at your desk or picking up your kids at school and wondering whatever became of the person who at 17 wanted to be a pilot or an artist or a professional wrestler or a gourmet chef or a novelist. That's exactly the position I found myself in 1988, the year my daughter was born. I always knew I wanted to be a writer. Looking back, I can see my talent and my teacher's encouragement of it from a very young age. I entered college knowing I could write, but at the same time, I was almost afraid to speak that dream out loud. It sounded so ridiculous. I want to write books. Plus, I had no idea how somebody made a living as a writer. It turns out to become a novelist, you have to park your butt on a chair for a very long time and actually, write a novel. And to become a great novelist, you have to write a really great novel. And during all those years of imagining my destiny, I'd somehow overlooked that. But I did find an alternative. One day, I was a sophomore political science major at Penn State, and I stumbled into the offices of the Daily Collegian, the campus newspaper. I was hoping the editors would publish a letter that I'd written. And quite by accident, I had walked into the most energizing work environment I'd ever been in, or ever could have imagined. Back in the mid-1970s, teletype machines clattered away 24/7, and they spit out news from all over the world on these giant rolls of paper, which literally poured into the newsroom in these great cascading waves of news. Editors literally ripped those stories from the machines, and they debated their value, and they put the most important ones into the newspaper. I remember that the fog of the cigarette smoke in there was thicker than the politics. Photographers rushed in with fresh film and disappeared in the darkroom for days at a time. God only knows what went on in there. But one thing I knew right away, I wanted to be part of it. I literally changed my major the next day and never looked back. I graduated 2 years later with a degree in journalism, and I became a professional journalist. At various papers over the next 15 years, I traveled the world. I covered some amazing stories. I wrote about everything from county fairs to rural poverty. I covered the 1987 People Power Revolution in the Philippines, and I filed stories from Siberia in the waning days of the Soviet Union. As we mentioned, my favorite journalistic moment came on Valentine's Day in 1988 when I got to call my wife from the lobby of the Mustang Ranch. It's a brothel in Nevada where I was working on a story about an Orange County guy's attempt to create the first stockholder-owned whorehouse. No, really, that's why I was there. And I was making a living as a writer. I was living the dream. Almost. Because I still wasn't the person I wanted to be, or I imagined myself to be when I was 17. Newspaper work paid the bills, and it supported my family. But after 15 years, that kind of writing no longer pushed my buttons. I still wanted to write books. No matter how much I enjoyed my day job, I felt like it was actually holding me back. I had the undeniable feeling that I'd come up short in life, that the universe was conspiring to keep me from my real goals. I had a mortgage by then and my daughter, and the frightening obligation to do right by my family. But I also had these dreams. What was I supposed to do with those? When was I supposed to write a novel? I made the same mistake a lot of us make. I'd let the need to make a living prevent me from being who I wanted to be. So I did what most people do. I whined about it. A lot. Pity my colleagues in the newsroom at the Orange County Register, to whom I complained constantly. God, I was a bore. And then a funny thing happened. While I was busy whining, the guy in the cubicle next to me, a guy named Robert Ferrigno, was spending his energy doing something far more constructive. He just worked alongside me all day, and then he went home at night, he parked his butt on a chair, and page by page, he wrote a novel. He never once mentioned this. He just did it. I only learned about it after a publisher paid him an ungodly amount of money for it. And Robert left the newspaper not long after that, and that's about the time I thought, aha. So here's the bad news, other than the fact that the world ends at 6 o'clock tomorrow. It's just not about talent. To be the person you want to be, It's going to take both talent and hard work. But I'm convinced that the only thing that limits any of us, is the amount of time and energy we're willing to put into the chase. For me, that meant I had to figure out how to write a novel. It sounds absurd, but here I was, an aspiring novelist who'd never even taken a fiction writing class. So I enrolled in a short story workshop taught by Margie Lucebrink. Now, anybody here who's had Margie knows that she's unfailingly enthusiastic about the craft of writing. She encouraged my dreams like no one before or since, even at a time when I now realize my dreams were really just delusions. I wrote an atrocious short story for her class, a political satire that Margie called interesting. And she said, I remember very vividly what she said. She said, it doesn't feel so much like a short story as it does a part of a novel. So what she was actually saying in her positive way was that this is a terrible short story. But what I heard her say was, this could be a novel. So I spent 2 years of trial and error, and eventually I was able to turn that atrocious short story into an equally atrocious novel. Thank you very much. Now, you may think that was a waste of time. It was not. The whole time I was writing that atrocious novel, I was learning. I decided to try again. And guess what? I still had all the tools I'd gathered while trying that first novel, and they came in pretty handy when I started writing another one. I didn't have to relearn all those lessons. Penguin Putnam paid me a tidy sum for that, what became my first published novel in 1997. They also published the second one in 1998, and they paid me for that too. And they paid me for the third in 2001. And since I was a journalist, I also wanted to write nonfiction books. So I did. HarperCollins published the first of those in 2004 and the second of them in 2006. And I'm just now finishing up a new nonfiction book for Bloomsbury, which will come out in the fall of 2012. It's about the strange and wonderful world of competitive duck painting. I'm not kidding about this. This is my life. I know that sounds odd, but here's something even more odd. I never got around to quitting my day job. Before I knew what was happening, I was doing what once would have sounded impossible. I was not only helping raise my family, but I was maintaining 2 successful careers at the same time. A lot of people ask me how I do that, and I'm here to tell you there's nothing magic about it. It's not even that hard. So here's the secret. 4 little words that still guide me today. Ready? 10 hours a week. For most of you, that will be the difference between living the life you always wanted and living a life that comes up short of your dreams. Maybe you want to paint. Maybe you want to dance. Maybe you want to run marathons. Chances are your day job isn't going to require you to do any of those things or pay you to do them. But by finding an extra 10 hours a week of sustained, directed, focused effort, hours that you could just as well be spend watching TV or surfing the web or posting every flatulent fact of your life on Facebook, you can become who you always wanted to be. It doesn't matter where you find the time, early mornings, late nights, even downtime in the car during a commute. My friend Susan Straight wrote the novel that earned her a National Book Award nomination while she was waiting in her van outside her daughter's basketball practices. In the end, 10 hours a week really isn't much time at all. You just have to find those extra hours and use them wisely. The false choice I see too many people make is this: I only do what somebody pays me to do. It's a trap life lays for all of us. Don't fall into it, because then you'll spend your life doing someone else's work. Work for yourself, even if you have to do it on your own time. Let me leave you with one of my favorite stories. It's about someone who I believe also figured all that out. His name's Claude Bell. Bell grew up in Atlantic City, New Jersey, where he spent much of his youth creating sand sculptures along the boardwalk for tourists' loose change. He eventually made a career of it, touring the continent, creating sculptures for fairs and exhibitions. He worked for many years as a sand sculptor at Knott's Berry Farm. So for most of his life, he built things that had all the permanence of smoke By day's end, his wonderful creations were reduced to piles of nothing. That apparently wears on a man. So Bell finally decided to do something he'd wanted to do since he was a teenager: build something that would last 500 years. He bought 60 acres of land out in the desert between here and Palm Springs. Interstate 10 was brand new at the time, and Bell was in his 60s by then. But it was there that he began spending his 10 hours a week, on weekends, evenings, days off. His wife, Anna, was skeptical. She once told me, "I kept thinking, why would anybody buy a piece of sand and dirt? I couldn't imagine what he was going to do with that piece of ground." But Bell had a plan. He wanted to make a permanent mark on this world before leaving it. And eventually his grand idea began to take shape. An unusual shape, to be sure. Eventually, passing motorists on the I-10 began to recognize it as the shape of a 150-ton steel-reinforced concrete dinosaur, an apatosaurus. Maybe you've seen it, rising like a mirage just off the Cabazon exit on the way to Palm Springs. And when Claude Bell was done with that first dinosaur, he built it a companion, a 100-ton steel-reinforced concrete Tyrannosaurus Rex. This wasn't as insane as it sounds. Bell owned part of a nearby restaurant, and he imagined his dinosaurs as a reliable lure for hungry motorists. But making money was hardly his prime motivation. He spent $300,000 and countless hours building those dinosaurs, but he charged only 50 cents admission for adults and 25 cents for kids. No, Claude Bell's dinosaurs were clearly about something else. And so they stand today, more than a decade after Claude Bell's death, two creatures marooned in that godforsaken place. They're harder to see from the freeway these days because so much commerce has grown up around them. But in 500 years, after the nearby outlet malls and the Burger King and the Indian Casino have all crumbled into dust, I like to think Claude Bell's dinosaurs will still be there, a silent monument to one man's stubborn refusal to give up on the dreams of his youth. And so, class of 2011, it's time to get out there, make your marks, build your dinosaurs. Trust me, there are going to be plenty of obstacles in your way, plenty of people who will tell you that what you want isn't practical or doesn't pay enough or is doomed to fail. Here's my advice: ignore them. But what will give you the right to do so is your willingness to find those 10 extra hours a week. Those hours and your commitment to become who you imagined yourself to be when you were 17 are the difference between settling for a life that doesn't make you happy and proving all those people wrong. And nothing will make you happier than that. Thank you all. Thank you, Margie. And best of luck to each of you.